Conservative lawmakers and activist groups are slamming the legislation drafted by House Republicans to undo the Affordable Care Act. Americans for Prosperity, a political arm of the conservative billionaire Koch brothers, said Tuesday that the draft breaks promises that Republican lawmakers made to voters. Any objection from Americans for Prosperity should get lawmakers' attention because the group has a track record of mobilizing the Republican Party's base against legislative plans. The group is perhaps best known for turning the Tea Party into a political force after President Obama's inauguration. It has 3.2 million active members and chapters in 35 states, and in the 2014 midterm election reportedly dedicated more than $100 million to opposing lawmakers who'd voted for Obamacare. On Thursday, I sat down with the president of Americans for Prosperity, Tim Phillips. We wanted to know where the group stood more generally on replacing Obamacare, how it felt about President Trump's administration so far, and what it was looking for in the Republican Congress. What is the rubric you're using to assess the Republican Congress and specifically House Speaker Paul Ryan?
There are 3 or 4 priorities that they said they had. Certainly we have as well. And we're going to grade how they do on those. First, are they really genuinely completely rolling back and repealing Obamacare? They promised that in election after election. If you ask most Americans, hey, what's the one promise they've made, these Republicans, they would tell you to repeal Obamacare. And so we're going to grade them based on that. Tax reform. If we're ever going to get the economy moving above 3%, actual growth that can give hope and opportunity to a lot of Americans, we need lower, flatter rates. Can they get that done? It's a big lift, but they've promised it. It's important to do it. Rolling back the Obama era extreme environmental regulations. They are doing that. That's where they're making the most progress so far. And then probably the hardest one of all is reining in excessive government spending, both on entitlements and discretionary.
Let's talk about Obamacare. You want a complete repeal of the law, but the White House and many Republicans want to leave certain parts of it in place. Is this something that your group is prepared to stand wholly against if the White House and Republicans in Congress decide we're going to try and preserve a few of those elements of Obamacare?
We don't have any issue at all with trying to make some of the good parts of the law, and there's only a couple. One of them is the pre-existing condition. We want to make sure those are still taken care of. Our goal in repealing Obamacare isn't just to go back and tear out a law that the president passed that we don't like. We want to actually improve health care for every American. And when we look at Medicaid, which now has 70 million Americans who have been forced onto Medicaid, the highest in our history by a long ways, it's substandard care.
As this process moves forward, some Republicans have expressed concern about the time it might take between a repeal and a replacement. Is there any kind of political cover that you can give to those Republicans who are hearing from constituents that, in fact, they are worried about that?
We know that there are raucous town hall meetings around the country right now, and they're getting a lot of phone calls from folks on the other side saying don't repeal Obamacare. It's important for Republicans to remember that they've won 4 consecutive elections, 2010, 12, 14, and 16, in Congress. They have some of the largest majorities since the 1920s, in large part because they ran on repealing Obamacare. And they need to keep their promises they've made in election after election to the American people, regardless of whether they're having a few uncomfortable town hall meetings. These next 6 to 8 months are an enormous opportunity for the Republican Party, but there's also peril. If they fail, if they don't repeal Obamacare, if they really whiff on that, I think that their majority will be a one-term majority.
What are the most significant gaps, you think, between your group's sort of core convictions and goals and what you've seen from the White House so far?
We agree with them on a lot. Obamacare repeal, tax reform, the need to lower and flatten rates to try to get this economy going again. We do disagree on trade. We think free trade is a better way to go. It lowers prices for consumers. This border adjustment tax, that's an example of something that's protectionist, where you try to close down trade with other countries or slap tariffs on it to make their products more expensive. The problem with that is corporations just pass through those taxes to consumers. So we disagree there. And then sometimes on spending, we hear a wish list from Republicans, both in Congress and in the presidency and the administration. They want to spend more money on this or this or this or this. And it's important to note we have a deficit, this $20 trillion. It hasn't been talked much about by the Republicans so far. But the party in power regardless of who they are. They like to spend money.
I mean, the president has talked about an infrastructure bill as part of a way to boost the economy and create jobs.
Yeah, we saw that with the stimulus when Obama did it back in 2009. Almost $1 trillion was spent beginning then. It did nothing to get the economy moving because government doesn't create prosperity. It doesn't create jobs. It simply redistributes money. And right now it takes money we don't have and borrows it in effect on these projects. And you also have government, whenever you hear about all these big infrastructure projects, you have government picking winners and losers.
All right, let's talk specifically about the president's proposed budget. $54 billion increase for defense, cuts to domestic spending while leaving Social Security and Medicare untouched. Where do you stand on the budget?
We think you have to have entitlement reform. You do. Starting with Medicaid block granting. There's a chance the president's administration will go with Paul Ryan on that. The speaker has said he thinks we do need to block grant Medicaid, let states experiment with it. That's an important first step, but we do think you have to reform entitlements if you're ever going to get the budget to a point where we aren't piling up debt and deficits.
But the president has seemed to promise early on that he wasn't going to touch Social Security.
Yeah, well, Medicare and Medicaid, those are two areas that we hope we can see some movement on with reform. Medicaid, the president does seem a little interested there on the Medicaid front. Medicare, he says no. And the important point that we make on Medicare is that it's going bankrupt. The Medicare board itself says that within 12 years is the best estimate, it'll be bankrupt. And that's one part of the budget that concerns us. On defense itself, we don't really have a view as to whether it should go up or down. What we are saying is, let's have firm limits on discretionary spending. And however the administration and Congress want to prioritize spending, maybe it's toward roads and bridges, maybe it's toward defense, that's their prerogative. But we do need a hard cap on discretionary.
Let me ask you about the business environment right now. We have seen President Trump apply pressure on various companies through Twitter. We saw this with Carrier, we saw this with Ford. What kind of environment do you think now exists for corporations in this country?
I think if you have government contracts, whether it's to build a fighter plane or Air Force One or really any other significant government contract, there should be a high level of scrutiny. If you're an individual company and you don't have government contracts, it is troubling to see politicians try to single out a company if they're not breaking the law. Now, if they're breaking the law, that's different. But if they're following the law but you don't like what they're doing with their business, that can be troubling.
Is there an element of instability in that? Because, you know, certainly the president of the United States has the power to move markets with what it is he says.
Yeah, it's better. Our goal is to have government, whether it's the president or Congress, simply create a level playing field where the rules are clear, the rule of law is sacrosanct, and then that's it. And they're not out there trying to impact the behavior of individual businesses using the power of government. We don't want to see government picking winners and losers.
So your group didn't spend any money on the presidential race in 2016. Is Americans for Prosperity getting out of presidential politics?
No, we look at each election on a case-by-case basis. We're not an appendage of either party. If we like the Republican nominee, then we'll support that nominee if they are good on the issues that matter to us. We worked very hard to make sure that Republicans held the Senate last year. We spent well over $100 million on that effort. We had field staff and volunteers across these Senate states because we thought Harry Reid as majority leader was a disaster for the country. Chuck Schumer would have been no better. So we were active on the Senate side. We were active at the state level in a lot of cases. President, we decided to stay out. We did get involved in 12. We tried to defeat Obama. We failed, and it was a tough loss. But we look at it on a case-by-case basis. And truthfully, if we could find Democrats who are on our issues, that we support, we would absolutely look at supporting them as well. But their party has moved, dramatically to the left in the last few years, though.
So it's not a matter of whether or not presidential politics themselves matter versus congressional ones. You sort of look at it on an individual case-by-case basis.
I'll give you another example. In 2008, we looked at the John McCain, Barack Obama campaign, and we stayed out of it. John McCain was for cap and trade, so was Barack Obama. John McCain on a lot of the cronyism issues that we've discussed today, he was, just not really where we were on some of the cronyism issues. So we stayed out of the 2008 election. We did not get involved that year.
The last question I have is, what is your relationship then with Vice President Mike Pence?
We have a deep respect for Vice President Pence. When he was the governor of Indiana, we worked with him as he cut taxes in Indiana, some of the largest tax cuts in modern Indiana history, helped get that economy going in the state again. When he was in Congress, his voting record was sterling. He did not support all the bailouts that many Republicans and Democrats supported at the end of the Bush years. He consistently voted on free market principles to try to bring prosperity to this country. So we have enormous respect based on his record as governor of Indiana and as a member of Congress and in the leadership as well. And we talk to him on a consistent basis, and he is someone we have a lot of respect for.
So fair to say he is an ally of your group?
He's been over the years someone we've worked with a lot, and he's came to a lot of our events over the years. So he's someone we have a lot of respect for and a good relationship with.
Okay. Tim, thank you so much.
You bet. Good to see you.